I want to welcome and thank everybody for joining us today for this week's broadcast. My name is Tim West. Today we will watch part one of a two-part message from David J. Smith titled America's Demise. This is message number 648A, and David J. first delivered this message on June 26th, 1996. That was a little over 30 years ago. So let's listen closely and see if you can recognize any of these things today. Well, I had the camera working last night, but today it just won't focus, so I'll just display the dates for this year's spring feast days. And I want to apologize for the issues with the website these past few weeks. I have resolved things to the point where the website is stable. I still have some things to address, but I will focus on those after the spring feast days. With that said, having had those issues, I was unable to keep you updated on the sighting of the new moon starting God's new calendar year. The new moon for this year was sighted in Jerusalem as well as by many here in Texas just after sunset on the evening of Monday, March 11th, 2024. And the barley will be ready for the wave sheaf offering, and other seasonal signs are also present. Therefore, the new moon on the evening of the 11th marked the beginning of God's new year. This means that Passover this year will be in the evening of Monday, March 25th, just before sunset, heading straight into the first day of unleavened bread, beginning at sunset on Monday, March 25th, going through and until sunset on Tuesday, March 26th. The first day of unleavened bread is a high day. We do no work on that day. We also have to have our homes, vehicles, and workplaces cleaned of all leavening prior to that. Make sure you have some unleavened bread on hand, as we are to eat at least a piece of unleavened bread each day during the 7 days of unleavened bread. The last day of unleavened bread will begin at sunset on the evening of Sunday, March 31st, and continue through and until sunset on the following evening of Monday, April 1st. The last day of unleavened bread is also a high day, and we do no work on that day. And this brings us to Pentecost. This year, Pentecost will begin at sunset on the evening of Saturday, May 18th, and go through and until sunset on Sunday, May 19th. I have these dates listed on the website, newswatchmagazine.org, and I will work on the video this week to try to get the camera to function properly for next week's broadcast. But for now, let's jump right into today's message from David J. Smith. So grab something to sip on, some lunch or your favorite snack, find a comfortable place to relax, and enjoy today's message.
Newswatch Magazine presents the analysis of world news in the light of Bible prophecy with David J. Smith.
Have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? For the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, and I'm quoting their statements, we, these 56 men, mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. End of quote. You might recognize these very impressive words from the 56 founders and who signed the document, the Declaration of Independence. 56 men signed that Declaration of Independence, knowing that when they signed, they were risking everything that they owned. Everything. Their very lives were at risk also. Isn't this the same thing that Jesus Christ requires of us? When we're baptized into the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of our sins, Haven't we declared war on Satan and his system? And if necessary, we'll have to give up everything in this world to attain to the kingdom of God? These men knew what they were risking. But what kind of men were they? The group included lawyers, merchants, farmers, and a large plantation owners. These were the educated men who had independent means. They were wealthy. These were the ones that had the most to risk when they declared independence from England. All were respected leaders in the colonies of that day. In June of 1776, the members of the Continental Congress were assembled at Philadelphia to consider the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. On July 1st and 2nd, the Congress debated whether the Declaration of Independence, which Thomas Jefferson had been authorized to draw up, should be signed and the United States should be an independent nation. Adams wrote a friend in Georgia on July 1st, and I'll quote what John Adams wrote. "This morning is assigned the greatest debate of all, a declaration that these colonies are free and independent states has been prepared. This day or tomorrow is to determine its fate." End of quote. On July 3rd and 4th, the Declaration of Independence was considered section by section. Some sections were amended, some were rejected, but by the end of July 4th, the Declaration of Independence was signed as a document. Here's what John Hancock said as he affixed his signature, quote, "There, His Majesty can now read my signature without glasses." He wrote it real large. "And he can double the reward on my head." End of quote. The British had offered a reward of £500 for the arrest of John Hancock. A similar reward had been offered upon the head of John Adams for his arrest. There were two individuals there. One of them, I'll use the word portly to hide the fact he was fat, and the other was a slim man. Mr. Harrison remarked to Elridge Gary, who was very slim, I quote, "When the hanging scene comes to be exhibited, my friend, I shall have the advantage over you." In other words, he was fat, he would hit the bottom, he would be dead in an instant. "With me, it'll be over in a minute. But with you, you'll be dancing on air after I'm gone for an hour." End of quote. And then Benjamin Franklin made a statement. He said, quote, "Indeed, we must all hang together. Otherwise, we shall most assuredly hang separately." End of quote. Now, this is the humor of those who were about to declare themselves free from the most mighty military nation on the face of the earth at that time. But what happened to these great stalwarts who signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776? In a very fascinating book called The Rest of the Story by Paul Harvey, he's a well-known radio commentator, he gives a partial record of what happened to those men. He said that Carter Braxton of Virginia saw his ship swept from the sea. To pay his debts, he lost his home, all of his properties, and he died in rags for your and my freedom. Mr. Thomas Lynch, Jr. was a large plantation owner. He and his wife sailed for France. The ship never arrived and was never heard from again. Mr. Thomas McCant, he was harassed by the British soldiers, forced to move his family 5 times in 5 months. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family finally ended up in poverty and in hiding. Vandals looted the properties of Ellery, Clymer, Hall, Gwinnett, Wilton, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. Mr. Thomas Nelson, Jr. who had raised $2 million on his own signature to provide our allies, who happened to be the French at that time, provisions for them, personally paid back the loans. It wiped out his entire estate, and the United States government never reimbursed him. He died in bankruptcy. Francis Hopkinson, home was seized by the Hessians, who was allies with the British. He died in poverty. Francis Lewis, his home and everything that he had was destroyed. His wife was in prison, and she died a few months later while still in prison. Mr. Richard Stockton was captured. He was mistreated, mutilated, beaten, and he was a broken man. And he died at age 51 with his estate pillaged. Mr. Thomas Hayward, Jr., he was captured when Charleston fell and executed. Mr. John Hart, he was driven from his wife's bedside while she was dying. Their 13 children fled in every direction for their lives. They lived in forests and in caves. They returned home after the war to find that his family was gone, his property destroyed. He died a few weeks later of exhaustion and a broken heart. Lewis Morris, his land was destroyed. His family was scattered all over the United States at that time, the 13 colonies. Mr. Philip Livingston died within a few months of the war from the hardships that he had undertaken. And according to Mr. Paul Harvey, 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes confiscated from Rhode Island to Charleston. They were sacked, looted, occupied by the enemy, and finally burned to the ground. 2 lost their sons in the army, fighting for our freedom. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 men died in the war from its hardships or from bullets from the enemy. They fulfilled their pledge. They paid the price, and freedom in America was born. They gave us an independent America. The question is, will the United States of America survive after its 200th birthday? Is America on the demise, and if so, why? From February 15th to the 22nd of 1987 on ABC television was a mini-series. It was the most cleverly orchestrated propaganda program that I've ever yet seen on national television to undermine the United States people, and the message was clear that we should surrender. Director Wrye, W-R-Y-E, appeared February 23rd, 1987 on ABC television's Nightline with host Ted Koppel, who happens to be a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Wrye stated that the picture portrayed the American spirit. However, I'll call Mr. Wrye down publicly and accuse him of being a socialist New Ager with insider information for the final conquest of the United States of America. No one could have produced such a mini-series with New Age terminology and facts of regionalism without knowing the program for worldwide conquest of the United States of America. Well, if this is the case, in the interest of peace, many Americans have now been persuaded to support disarmament programs and to create a substitute for each nation's military. That substitute is the United Nations peacekeeping forces. Most people in the United States feel that their own personal rights and the independence of this nation would in no way be jeopardized if the United Nations organization became a world government and a world police force. But the vital question that very few seem to be asking today is, who would be left to restrain the power of an all-powerful United Nations world government? Who would be left to hold that organization in check? For his Secretary of State and Defense, former President John F. Kennedy selected Dean Rusk and Robert S. McNamara. Each of these individuals was a member of the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations, which is a private organization founded by Marxist Edward Mandell House in 1921 for the purpose of bringing about a one-world government. Only 9 months after John F. Kennedy's administration was in office, to be exact, on September 25th, 1961, Mr. Kennedy traveled to the United Nations headquarters in New York City to present a proposal entitled Freedom from War, the United States Program for General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World. This document you'll never find given out anymore by the government of the United States. It's publication number 7277 by the State Department of the United States of America. The work of this Dean Rusk-led State Department, with the willing acquiescence of Mr. Robert McNamara, who led the Defense Department, the proposal was published as Department of State publication number 7277. In his remarks before the United Nations organization, former President Kennedy asked for a commitment from all nations, and I quote, "not to an arms race, but to a peace race, to advance together step by step, stage by stage, until general and complete disarmament had been achieved." End of quote. He didn't get such a commitment from the United Nations organization and all the members. Yet the United States of America embarked upon the Kennedy-launched program and began to disarm the United States of America when other nations were continuing to build. This document, Freedom from War, or as it's called, number 7277, proposes 3 stages of disarmament, ending with a transfer of the United States Armed Forces to the United Nations organization. As Senator Joseph Clark of Pennsylvania approvingly reminded his colleagues in the Senate speech of March 1st, 1962, he said, and I quote, "This program is the fixed and determined and approved policy of the United States government." End of quote. When you read the document itself, it confirms that disarmament, and I quote, "would proceed to a point where no state would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened United Nations peace force." End of quote. In other words, the only significant military power left in the world would be the United Nations organization. This reminds me of a quote found in what is called the Bible, which has been discarded by so many people today. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, it says that the man John stood upon the sand of the sea, and he saw a beast rise up out of the sea. The beast is a government in Bible prophecy. And he said that it wore 10 crowns, and it had on its head the names of blasphemy. In other words, it would not be a Christian government. The 10 crowns would show that it was broken up into 10 global regions. And it so happens that today, the Club of Rome has already made a computer model of all nations on earth and broken it down along economic lines into 10 global regions, just like the Bible predicted 2,000 years ago. Notice what it says, though, in verse 4 of this particular chapter. "And they worshiped the dragon," that's Satan the devil, "which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" If there is only one military force on the face of the earth and nobody can stand up against it, wouldn't that fulfill Revelation chapter 13, verse 4, showing that we're living in the day of the Lord? The provisions of this proposal, number 7277, would actually leave the United States of America defenseless before the United Nations and before any other nation that did not disarm just like the United States is doing. And it would place the United Nations' superior military power into the hands of the United Nations Under Secretary for Political and Security Council Affairs, the overseer of all United Nations military activity. Why is this important for every American to understand? The post, by a secret agreement concluded at the founding of the United Nations organization, and this agreement was an astonishment to Undersecretary General Trygve Lie, has been held by a communist ever since the founding of the United Nations organization. The man who holds it as I presently speak is the 14th in succession, and he is a communist. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Since communism is dead, he's from this country of Russia. He's in the Soviet Union. Unless our leaders stop their insanity of disarming and turning all of our military forces over to the United Nations organization, our military will soon be controlled by a communist. No wonder our media is propagandizing us, and the former Soviet Union is also propagandizing us and telling us communism is dead. America, they don't want you to know that one of their communist leaders will be heading up your military apparatus. And if he's in charge of the United States of America's military apparatus, who do you think they will use the military forces upon? Not the Russians. They're already communist. They'll use it upon the United States of America, which will not adopt socialism and communism knowingly. All of our leaders, are they knowledgeable that they're literally implementing this plan? Yes, they are. The Nuclear Test Ban Treaty is part of this United Nations disarmament program. The treaty banning the use of outer space for nuclear weapons is part of the treaty. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is part of the same program. State Department Publication 7277. So is the INF, the Intermediary Nuclear Forces, that was signed by former President Reagan and Soviet leader Gorbachev. And it was formally ratified by the Senate in 1988. When this booklet, Freedom from War, was first made public to the citizens of the United States, many of the citizens were so startled they began to obtain it in large numbers. It was quickly declared out of print by the State Department of our government. Then it was superseded in April of 1962 by a more precise statement of the United States disarmament policy in the document entitled Blueprint for the Peace Race, Outline of Basic Provisions and a Treaty on General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World. I'll refer to this as simply the Blueprint from now on. This was presented formally to the 18-nation United Nations Committee on Disarmament that was meeting in Geneva, Switzerland. The foreword to this blueprint states that it doesn't cancel the plans given in Freedom from War. So the Freedom from War document is still in existence. This just adds to it. It merely elaborates and extends the proposal of the September 25th, 1962 document. The date that the freedom from war was unveiled at the United Nations headquarters by President Kennedy. Now, in complete accord with this freedom from war, the blueprint spells out its overall goal in the third of these three stages. Quote, the parties to the treaty would progressively strengthen the United Nations peace force established in stage 2 until it had sufficient armed forces and armaments so that no state could challenge it. End of quote. Haven't we seen some dramatic transference of military forces to the United Nations starting in 1990 and 91 under George Bush? When questioned about the commitment of the United States to this blueprint, Mr. Richard Richstein, who was the General Counsel of the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, stated on May 11, 1982, in a letter that, quote, the United States has never formally withdrawn this proposal, end of quote. So we're still living under the guidance of the blueprint and the 1961 document John F. Kennedy drew up, Freedom from War. In January of 1991, getting up to modern times, William Nary, the official historians of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, confirmed again, and I quote, that the proposal has not been withdrawn, end of quote. Mr. Nary also confirmed that certain features of this proposal have been incorporated in subsequent arms agreements. So in summary, the plan to disarm the United States in favor of an all-powerful United Nations peace force is unfolding before our eyes, and the fulfillment of Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 to 4 is jumping off the newspapers and off the screen of your television. The news is telling us daily of the United Nations apparatus that is being strengthened. It calls this plan for relinquishing virtually all of our nation's military forces to the United Nations command, whose leader, by agreement with the United States and the USSR during the founding sessions of the United Nations, will always be a communist. Is the United Nations drawn up and designed to become a blueprint for world international socialism, communism? Yes, it is. They even use the policy for financing the organization. Those who have support it the most. Those who have the least support it the least. That's the old communist axiom. From those who have will give, to those who have not will receive. That's why the United States is constantly supplying large amounts of international funds to other nations. And we receive none because we're the ones who have to give. So we support other nations. So in the end, when this agreement is finalized and come into fruition, and I quote their statement in their literature, no state could challenge the United Nations. And remember, it will be led by a communist. Even though they propagandized and told us that communism is dead. This supposed disarmament program is not as much about weapons elimination as it is about weapons distribution and control. The United Nations, under a communist, wants to control every piece of military equipment on the face of the earth. If the program succeeds, only the United Nations and those nations that do not come under the agreement with the United Nations will continue to have weapons. That means that you and I will not have weapons, because under the amendment also and the proposal, it takes away private ownership of firearms. If this drive by the United Nations ever succeeds, only the government and the United Nations and those who are outlaws will continue to possess guns. You and I will not have guns. Why do you think the United Nations peacekeeping forces, when they went into Somalia, went house to house confiscating private firearms? I now want to deviate, and I want to bring you up to date on something that is happening the very moment in time that we're hearing and recording this program. A national intelligence representative who lectures to law enforcement officials stated that certain people who are announcing what really did happen in Waco, Texas, is correct, and that the government of the United States has lied to the people. Most revealing was information that the forces that assaulted the Davidian compound and David Koresh in Waco, Texas, was actually a United Nations related project. Listen closely now to the information that I'm going to give. This documentation is true. What really happened in Waco, Texas? You'll find it hard to believe, but it's the truth. Actually, the forces that assaulted the Davidian compound was a consolidation of agents from the CIA, FBI, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, the drugs, and the IRS, and other police and government agencies, all combined. And the Texas Rangers were deliberately left out. In the state of Texas, the Texas Rangers has the greatest authority, and they always solve firearms and weapons problems, drug problems, but they were not even invited because their jurisdiction was superseded by what is called the United Nations Multi-Jurisdictional Task Force. According to this informer, who must remain anonymous, their ultimate goal is, and I quote, to conduct house-to-house search and seizure, separation and categorization of men, women, and children in large numbers, categorization and transfer to detention facilities, and the running of detention facilities. End of quote. Where are those individuals who left the Davidian compound? They're in detention facilities. Not one is excluded. Our documentation reveals that the multi-jurisdictional task force, the force that assaulted the Waco compound, works in conjunction with and is subservient to FinCEN, FINCEN, which is the United Nations' next level of law enforcement. FinCEN is made up of foreign military and secret police that number about 300,000 in the United States of America at present. At Waco, Texas, the attempt was made to introduce these black-suited FinCEN troops to the American public as something good. After all, wasn't this just a cult? I mean, they were outside normal Christianity in America, weren't they? And yet that total disregarded the First and Second Amendments of the Constitution of the United States, saying that we have freedom of religion and the government cannot force a state religion upon us. The plan was to make their appearance acceptable coming against other United States citizens. Now, I've sought to maintain all along that an assault upon this religious compound in Waco, Texas, if they assaulted them, they could eventually assault any church, any headquarters of any church anywhere in the United States of America, if this is allowed to go unpunished by our government. Here's why. I want you to listen very carefully. We're told by the liberal media and by the Cult Awareness Network, which is working in conjunction with the new Attorney General of the United States of America. They have now redefined the term cult, or a dangerous cult. What is their definition now? The official media, United States government, the Attorney General of the United States, because she said that she was personally responsible for the action of Waco, Texas. What is the definition of a cult? America, are you ready for this? Every person that professes to be a Christian in America is now considered a cult, and you are now on the hit list of the United States government. Here are those character traits of a cult. A strong belief in the Bible. Do you believe in the Bible? Do you have a strong belief? A belief in the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's all it takes, and you're a member of the cult. A third characteristic of the redefinition of a cult by the Attorney General, the liberal media, and the Cult Awareness Network is those who frequently attend Bible studies. Does your church have services twice, one day a week, and maybe a midweek service? Do you have what is called vacation Bible schools? Do you have meetings where traveling evangelists come in and speak for a week at a time? Then you are a cult, according to the Attorney General of the United States. Are you ready for this one, America? What happened to your First Amendment? You don't have one. The United Nations Charter now controls your destiny. A high-level financial giving to a church makes you a cult member. You want to give to the church? You're now a cult member. They're going to put such pressure on everybody that those who give to support Christianity will dry up their financial well. They want to destroy Christianity. And yet in 1892, by a 9-0 decision by the Supreme Court of the United States on February 29th, leap year of that year, they declared every document of the Constitution of the United States and every state document shows and proves that this nation was declared a Christian nation. Our government has overthrown those precepts. Our government is against Christians today. Do you know what another qualification to become a member of a cult is? Homeschooling your children. You are now declared a cult. You know why? Because homeschooling children who are tested by the state averages a third higher intelligence than those that go to state-supported schools, public schools. Why? Because the propaganda for state schools is not to educate, but it's to de-educate. It's to make a socialized person, not an educated person, because those who are educated and who can think clearly and freely are the hardest to control in a socialistic society. Another characteristic of a cult according to the Attorney General, the Cult Awareness Network, and the liberal news media, is anyone who accumulates food and guns for survival. Those are now declared cults. You want to store up fresh water, food, packaged food? They consider you a member of a cult. And the last one I'll mention today slaps me right in the face. Anyone who has an inordinate fear of the government. I don't fear the government, but that the government has now no longer become a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and it's representing the people. But it is a government of socialism, and it now is a government of tyranny against the people of the United States. Anyone who says these things are now declared a cult. There goes many good Baptist folks and their ministers. There goes many of the Pentecostals that I've seen on television. There goes many people who speak of Bible prophecy. Every Christian in America fits into one of these categories. So now the war is on against Christianity. On television, did you happen to notice that on occasions there was a black helicopter and a black, heavily armed 58-ton tank that was used to bulldoze and tear into the buildings of the Waco compound? What was the purpose of it? They were going to shoot tear gas into the rooms occupied by the Branch Davidians. And one person who jumped out of a second-story window, which I have film footage of, stated they blocked the stairwells. The tear gas paralyzed us, and we couldn't get out because they blocked all the back entrances that the television cameras couldn't see. And then they knocked in the doors and the walls to block the stairwells so we couldn't get out. We all know what happened after that. They didn't commit suicide. They were burned to death to cover up the evidence. We're told that this equipment and the troops operating it were a part of the FinCEN, F-I-N-C-E-N operation, jointly with the next level of the United Nations organization. So the bold objective of these forces is to set up United Nations battle groups inside the United States of America and Canada. For military purposes, the United States has been divided up into 10 regional areas. Regionalism, it was first done by former President Richard Nixon. Already they have detention centers set up in Florida, Virginia, Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Arizona, California, and Alaska, to name some of them. It's reported there's 37 facilities in all, military bases that have been refurbished, and even one in Arizona out in the middle of the desert with not one road leading to it. A brand new compound that a military personnel who was about to retire, him and his buddies went drinking, and they went driving their Jeeps out into the desert and stumbled upon it accidentally. The compound had row after row of barracks, but no one occupied them. And it was surrounded by barbed wire, and the barbed wire leaned in like any prison facility. There have been reports of railroad cars equipped for transporting prisoners. This is a reminder of what took place in World War II in Hitler's Germany during the Holocaust. Also, reports have come in to watch for an attempted removal of weapons from all residents where these black-suited FinCEN troops from the United Nations will be operating in certain places in the United States. When we send troops abroad, whether in Somalia or we will send them into Yugoslavia, or even to Peru. The first order of business of our people under the United Nations organization is to confiscate weapons of the citizenry. Every time. An entire document used to authorize this confiscation of the weapons in our country was taken word by word from the Nazi gun control law during World War II. And it states that if the weapons are taken from the citizens, I want to rephrase that statement. It does not say if we take the weapons. It simply says when they're taken. You and I must understand this is going to happen. That means the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is totally being ignored or overridden by the Charter of the United Nations. This means you and I, as a citizen, can no longer do what the Second Amendment authorizes us to do. Have weapons to protect us if our government becomes a tyranny. This means those in America who will not stand for it will go to the detention centers, and they will systematically be eliminated, just like in every communist country. Of course, we realize in presenting this that this is unbelievable information to those that have not been keeping up with the progress of this United Nations World Constitution for the last 45 years. Here's what the United Nations Constitution states, I quote, "The age of nations must end." That means the United States of America, our government, sovereignty and freedom for you and I must end. I'll continue the quote. "The governments of the nations have decided to order their separate sovereignties into one government, to which they surrender their arms." End of quote. Can it be clearer? The United Nations was formed so that every nation on earth would surrender all of its armaments, its military, to the United Nations, and it would become the sole owner of all weapons. Just like Revelation 13:4 says, no man would be able to stand against the beast. If you refuse the surrender of your arms, you will find you and your family taken to task, and you will be taken to a detention center. In part of their bold move of this objective, they want to disallow religious training in the home and in the church. Remember Mr. Pastor Everett Sullivan of Nebraska, who was jailed because of holding day school in his church? Mr. Peter Hoagland, the Nebraska state senator, stated, and they taped it and played it on television, I quote, "Fundamental Bible-believing people do not have the right to indoctrinate their children in their religious beliefs because we, the state, are preparing them for the year 2000, when America will be a part of a global world society and their children will not fit in." End of quote. No wonder in the movie, the miniseries on ABC television in 1987, Amerika, spelled with a K. Remember, the educational institution was run by the state, and the young son of the supposed president of the United States had a red bandana around his neck, and he stood up before the entire school audience and said twice, "Anyone who will not fit into the new age will be crushed." Twice he said that. They were warning America by the year 2000, if your children will not fit, then they and the parents who are training them will be crushed. America, the target is against Christianity. If you're a Christian, you are now considered a cult. I don't care what branch of what church you are. If you attend church and you believe in the Bible, you're now a cult, and you're on the list for the government to attack and exterminate. According to the New Age, New World Government plans, quote, these are well-laid plans which will culminate before the year 2000 to usher the United States, along with the rest of the nations of the world, into a global community allegedly under the control of the United Nations. End of quote. No wonder John Rankin, United States Congressman, said, and I quote, the United Nations is the greatest fraud in all history. Its purpose is to destroy the United States. End of quote. This was a congressman. He said the purpose of the United Nations is to destroy the United States and our freedom. Dr. Kurt E. Koch, a professor who's lectured at 100 universities in 65 countries concerning the New World Order under the United Nations, states it will be a system in which, and I quote, each person will have a registered number, without which he will not be allowed to buy or sell. And there will be one universal world church. Anyone who refuses to take part in this universal system will have no right to exist. End of quote. I'm talking serious things. Only Jesus Christ of Nazareth and total submission to Him can carry you through the horrifying things that they have planned for us by the year 2000. David Spangler, who is director of the Planetary Initiative, a United Nations group, explains, quote, no one will enter the New World Order unless he or she will make a pledge to worship Lucifer. No one will enter the New Age unless he takes a Luciferian initiation. End of quote. How soon are these plans to be implemented in the United States? If the United Nations troops are already being trained in places like Fort Dix, New Jersey, if there are already 300,000 that one person in the intelligence community has already said are in the United States, when will it be? The program, the miniseries Amerika in 1987, showed by 1997 that the United States had been occupied by United Nations troops by 10 years, and they were Russian troops. I don't know what troops from what country will be sent to the United States and that are here presently. But I do want you to hear what Ralph Nader said. Everybody knows who Ralph Nader is, consumer advocate. He was asked, is there a number or marking system plan in the United States for the hand or forehead in a new cashless society? Here's what Ralph Nader replied, quote, yes, and I have seen the machines that are now ready to put it into operation, end of quote. How close are we? The machines are already ready. I received from the Chemical Bank, international banker, the week before this taping took place, the offer to have a smart card where I could withdraw money in every nation on earth. Global. I could receive money from 150,000 different facilities all over the world. But you see, a smart card either can give you money or refuse you money. So if they get a smart card in the hand of everybody, that's the first step. And then they take you one step further, eliminate cash. Then you only have the smart card. You're at their mercy. Then they take you the next step. Let's put it in their right hand and forehead, because let's face it, some people lose their cards. So how close are we? A Mr. Ray Brubaker said that following World War II, he interviewed a pastor, Niemöller, of Germany, while he was the news director of WMBI radio in Chicago. This Mr. or Pastor Niemöller told Ray Brubaker that he failed to speak up when he saw what was happening during the days of the Nazis. He remained silent because he was afraid. Then one day they came and knocked on his door, and no one spoke up for him. So he was taken to the concentration camps. This happened in a society that parallels what's going on in the United States of America today, only with secret agreements with the United Nations. Instead of just national socialism, we're now talking about world socialism. So where he took for granted that nothing could happen to him in Germany, people in America today are taking for granted that it won't happen to them. However, I want you to know that it is happening in America when they send 500 troops to subdue one family, and the husband even ran for sheriff. That's what a good citizen he was. And they murdered his wife and son, and then they have the rest of the family standing trial. Do you think they're not coming after you when they've declared anyone who believes in the Bible and attends church and gives money to churches or believes in schooling your children at home? Do you think they won't come after you or me? As unbelievable as all this is to the American mind, let's review just for a moment President Bill Clinton's first 5 months in office. It reveals some astonishing things that have taken place. Are not Sodom and Gomorrah examples of what can be expected to nations that turn to sodomy? God obliterated them. He destroyed them as a nation. And yet we now have cabinet members. We have people that have been appointed by Mr. Clinton who are known lesbians, and even marched down the streets of Washington, D.C. in their 1993 lesbian and gay march on Washington. And they were out there hugging and kissing and making love to their same-sex lover, and yet now have been appointed in positions of authority in the government of the United States. What's happening? Is the United States of America on its way down and out? Let's look at just a few moments of some of the background of how we got into this situation. Who are the individuals who are involved in promoting such a suicidal proposal? Why is Congress going along instead of repudiating this whole dangerous program? How do we get out of it, if we can, before it's too late? I don't believe we can. I believe Bible prophecy has predicted it, because the morals of the people in this nation have reached an all-time low. And you know, God always starts judgment with his people. He looks at the lives of people who claim to be Christian and sees what they're doing first. Then he goes out to the rest of the nation. At the founding of the United Nations in 1945, the delegation from the United States included a young State Department official named Alger Hiss. He was widely acclaimed for both his ability and his enthusiasm for this world organization. As a result, he rose to become the acting Secretary General of the founding United Nations Conference. As a member of this steering and executive committee of the conference, he played a major role in drafting the United Nations Charter. He also helped to staff the United States delegation and was chosen by his peers for the prestigious task of personally transporting the Charter of the United Nations to the President and to the Senate for ratification. Alger Hiss, however, was later found to have been a secret communist, more loyal to a foreign power than the USSR than to the nation in which he was born, the United States. A 1950 State Department document named 15 other key United States government officials who were responsible, along with Alger Hiss, for planning the creation of the United Nations. Every single one of them were named as secret communists. Every one of them, no exceptions. They were Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White, Virginius Frank Coy, Noel Field, Lawrence Dugan, Henry Julian Wadley, John Carter Vincent, David Weintraub, Nathan Gregory Silvermaster, Harry Glaser, Victor Perlow, Irvin Kaplan, Solomon Adler, Abraham George Silvermaster, William K. Ullman, and William H. Taylor. This was taken from the document put out by the United States State Department, Post-War Foreign Policy Preparation, 1939 to 1945. Every one of these individuals were communists. Not only was the United States represented by a sizable number of communists, our nation's delegation also included 43 individuals who were then or soon thereafter to be leading members of the establishment organization called the Council on Foreign Relations. Every single one of them. But what's interesting is that Alger Hiss was a communist and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he was responsible for the planning of the United Nations. But there was another man by the name of Lachlan Curry, who also was a member of the United Nations delegation and the member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So as communists and members of the Council on Foreign Relations, they worked diligently to bring the world government into existence. They labored hard, just as hard to have the United States to become a part of it as creating the organization. Of course, from every other nation, there were delegations of socialists that represented all the nations, communists, one-worlders, and some of them were just, you would say, starry-eyed dreamers who were looking for utopia and an end to all the problems of the world. But when you get down to it, 45 years later, we find that there is an intense pro-United Nations propaganda program upon the American people that the words peace and United Nations are synonymous and interchangeable. And yet when you read the Charter of the United Nations, you'll find that it is not a charter for peace, but it's a charter to declare war by the United Nations upon any group of people that they decide would not fit into the new age of peace, as they call it. Is Bible prophecy happening? Did the Bible say there would be a government that would rise out of the sea of humanity? Yes, it did. I want to turn to several of those places in the Bible now. I've already read Revelation chapter 13. It states clearly that a beast rose up out of the sea. And in chapter 1, verse 10, it tells the time setting. the day of the Lord, right before the return of Jesus Christ. Then in Revelation chapter 17, I'll start in verse 1 through verse 6. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come here, I'll show unto you the judgment of the great whore. That's the false church that sits upon many waters. That's the nations of the earth, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Here is a great religious system that is indoctrinating people falsely, turning them away from the Bible and God Almighty in Jesus Christ. Verse 3, So he carried me in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast. What is scarlet color? It's a derivative of red. What is international red communism? Do you realize most people have never studied communism? They don't realize that socialism is only a stage till you reach communism. Communism is when the government is supposed to wither away, and mankind would have been changed, because when the socialist system is adopted, the economic program, and people are redistributed out on the countryside, and everybody has their own little plot of land given to them by the government, run by the government, maintained by the government. Everybody then will have a change of heart and will become good people. And they will share with their neighbors. Without the Holy Spirit working, there can be no change of human nature. The Holy Spirit is what changes man. And yet, this is what international socialism believes. When they take over and they redistribute people on the land, then man will automatically no longer need a government. And so the government, which will of necessity be a tyrannical dictatorship until they set up the whole system, then once mankind begins to no longer need Big Brother of George Orwell's 1984 book, then communism will come in with the withering away of the state. And no one will need government. No one will need rules, regulations anymore. This is the propaganda, and this is the ultimate goal. But first, they have to have an ironclad grip on the people and murder anyone who will not become a part of the system. This is socialism that they want through the United Nations organization. And the Bible predicted that it would come. It would be a scarlet-colored beast. Now drop down in the same chapter to verse 12. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with a beast. So they formulate the United Nations organization. Then they have the head of the United Nations. They break the world down into 10 global governing regions and assign one person over each one of them. And the key is that the Club of Rome defined their world computer organization as 10 kingdoms. Who rules over a kingdom? A king. So their design is to have a world king and 10 individual kings under that ruling the 10 regions. Verse 13 of Revelation 17. These have one mind. Yes, they're all international socialist communists. And shall give their power and strength unto the beast, to the United Nations organization, or whatever organization replaces it. These shall make war with the Lamb. Here's the time setting. The very close of the age, right before Jesus Christ descends out of the heavens, storms to planet Earth in whatever spaceship he travels in, and overcomes and overthrows the beast and the 10 kingdoms. And he will take over as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And look who's with him in the latter part of verse 14. For he is the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and they that are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. I submit to you that those who are called, chosen, and faithful are going to be the 144,000 in Revelation 14, verse 1 to 6. They are the ones that follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Wherever he goes. Let's go back now to the book of Daniel. Daniel woke up in the night with all kind of visions. These visions were written down on the pages of this book. Daniel was told, look, don't worry about it, Daniel. Go your way. The books are sealed. You won't understand what it's all about. But those at the end of the age will understand. And so it is. God has opened an understanding of the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and other prophecies for us. Because we understand the United Nations, its function, and what it's going to be, an international socialistic, red communistic system. In chapter 2 of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He expressed this dream to Daniel. And Daniel gave the interpretation, starting in verse 36. The dream, he said, would be sure. Verse 37. He starts the interpretation of the dream in time, chronological order with Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He said, you are the ones who will be the first king, the head of gold, a great empire. Then he drops down. And after you shall arise, this is verse 38 or 39, another kingdom inferior to you. So then we had the second kingdom that came, was the Persian kingdom, Medo-Persian Empire. Then in 39, and another third kingdom of brass, and it shall bear rule over all the earth, the known world at that time. And that happened, the Greco-Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. That was the Roman Empire that came. And it ruled all during the Middle Ages with various revivals, right on down until finally the Pope was taken and put in prison in 1798 in a French prison, and he died in 1799. The French General Berthier took him and put him in prison. And then with the defeat at Waterloo of Napoleon, we had the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire. And when I entered college in 1959 and had a world history course, European history, one of the headings on the chapter was Collapse of the Holy Roman Empire with the defeat of Napoleon in 1814. And so the Middle Ages ended, but there's going to be a revival of that final system. And it's going to be part of iron and part of clay. It's going to be a mixture of all nations on earth. Their economics, and they will be economically strong because of the Western world, the Western currencies. Then there will be economics that will, those nations that will be economically weak. And those are the third and fourth world nations. But notice in verse 44 of Daniel 2, and in the days of these kings, and it said there will be 10 toes, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. So when is God's kingdom coming? After the establishment of the false satanic system that is about to rise on planet Earth today. I have a question. Is your life right with God? If not, you had better get it right, because America, you are going into the system because of the national sins of this nation. But America, you're too young to die.